My name is Tasha. Thank you for joining this open conversation about the things that are going on in our world today. Typically, my channel is about the uplifting of women and how we can encourage each other. However, today, I'm inviting you to watch an episode where I've invited a few knowledgeable women to answer some questions that have recently come up in conversations that I've had regarding the Black Lives Matter movement. Lately, this movement is being discussed on a global level. There is hurt and anger on all sides. Some of these discussions are escalating with absolutely no peace, but I believe we can change that. We must get to a place where we can speak openly about these racial concerns without judgment from either side. I would ask that you watch this video with an open mind, an open heart, and an open spirit, no matter what nationality you are. Because the fact of the matter is, we've got to learn to communicate on all sides. If we don't do that, things are never going to change. And I really believe they can. I do. So without further ado, allow me to bring you into difficult discussions on Black Lives Matter. My panel of guests will include Dr. Cheryl Williams-Jackson, CEO of WJ Developmental Consulting, Professor Melanie Berru, public speaker, LaKiesha McDonald, CEO of LRM Growth Solutions, Natalie Carpenter, JD candidate, University of Maryland School of Law, and Melissa Field, professional blogger.
Hi, thank you guys for tuning in and watching difficult discussions on Black Lives Matter. Today I have 5 different friends of mine that are very near and dear to me. I want to let you know who they all are as we go on and as they chime in on this discussion. First, we have my mentor and also my supervisor. I used to say boss. She corrected me on that. She hates that word, but she's my supervisor. Her name is Dr. Cheryl Williams-Jackson, and she is the CEO of CWJ Developmental Consulting. And also we have Professor Melanie Berru, who is a public speaker and just a bright light here in the Stanislaus County, just always encouraging people in any way that she can. Next, we have LaKiesha McDonald. She is the CEO of LRM Growth Solutions and also a public speaker. And she is also a good friend of mine, a heart friend that I look to when I'm having times of trouble as well. Then we have Natalie Carpenter, who is my personal friend since childhood. She is a JD candidate at Baltimore School of Law. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
University of Maryland.
Yeah.
It's Maryland or Baltimore. We were like this.
Okay, so that is Natalie Carpenter. And last we have my friend Melissa Field. She is a professional blogger with her own website and just a brilliant woman in this community right now that is an ally for the Black Lives Matter movement. Without hindering you guys from moving forward, we're just going to go ahead and forge ahead right now. I'm going to start with my opening question. This is going to be directed at you, Dr. Jackson, and it is racial battle fatigue is a common occurrence right now with the Black community. Could you explain a little bit about how it is tragically affecting the Black community right now with this Black Lives Matter movement? Could you explain a little bit about racial battle fatigue?
Yeah, and I'm bringing it to you from that side, the mental health aspect, because that's where racial battle fatigue falls. And so the way that we define it is that it's the ability to cope with being overstressed by being oppressed or experiencing oppressive situations, but it's taking its toll on you and causing stresses or even trauma. But it's affecting you psychologically, physically, and the way that you process information and how you respond to things. So racial battle fatigue, we have several examples of what they look like, and I'm going to talk about a few of them. But when we're looking at it, it's people who are experiencing stereotype. They walk out of their front door and they have, because it has happened to them so often, that when they know that someone's maybe they're going to stereotype me, maybe they may discriminate against me, hold prejudice against me, inflict microaggressions on me. So all of these things, because it happens over and over again, you have these assumptions that you make. And quite often those assumptions come true. So therefore you try to find ways to cope. And sometimes those ways of coping may be effective and some may not be effective. So ineffective is that when you have people who eventually head into depression and they don't realize that that they're in depression. And the reason why is because we haven't come up with a diagnosis that says, you know, if you experience intensive or ongoing microaggressions in your life, that there may be times you don't want to get out of bed and walk out the door because in the back of your mind you're thinking, oh gosh, what will someone, you know, what will someone do today to bring my emotions to that place where I'm not able to function today? Or you question yourself over and over again about something that you know how to do. So so that's what, when we look at racial battle fatigue, it's this ongoing stressor that you're walking around with. Let me give you an example of one. Let's just talk about going into a store. So you're in a store, and if you've never had to question before walking in that store whether or not you should take your big purse in or small purse in, okay? So you have individuals who, and I just saw in the news where it just happened, on Girls Trek, they were going through it where they were stressing because she questioned whether she should take her big purse in with her. And she decided to go ahead and take it in, and she got a phone call, pulled her phone out, and by the time she got to the front door, they wanted to check her bag. Now, they found nothing in her bag, but you have to ask yourself, what made her question whether she should take, and I saw the bag was not that big, but you have to wonder what made her even question that. And then, so if you've never had to question yourself around that, then you may not know what her experience is around racial battle fatigue. So just use that word fatigue. It means that your body is just so tired. Your brain is so tired from having to try to process, what do I have to do to make sure that I can get in and out with no problems? Now, that shouldn't be the case. You should be able to go shopping in the store. And especially if I'm with my girlfriends, I just want to have fun. Go shopping with them. Yeah. But if you have to question yourself in that way, something else is going on here. Another example, and I'm still sticking with the store, is whether or not we've changed the rules now where you have to pay for a bag. You know how many parents have told their children, don't you dare leave out of that store without a bag, without your items that you buy. Don't you leave out of the store without putting them in a bag. Now, go in and just, ask as many families of people of color and ask how many of them have taught their children not to do that. But yet we've changed the policy now. So if they go into the store and they come out with a bag, the chances now go up that you will be the one that they'll look at and possibly say, did you purchase that? Now, on top of that, and I'm using this example as an example, sticking with the store, we also now have where we ask people, do you want a receipt or do you want me to email your receipt? So one of the things I do is if you email it to me, I have my email when I'm walking out of the store. Now, if you've never had to do that, you don't understand the experience of why someone, if someone has to do that over and over again, some of us just adjust and say, okay, I'll do the receipt, no big thing. Whereas you have people who will have to say, ooh, I have to think about that. No, just give me the receipt. Or do what I do, which is mine is always on my phone when you send me my receipt. So if someone happens to stop me and say, and I know that the chances go up because of this skin color that I will get stopped. And then let's see what else. I said the receipt. Or even going in your purse to get something, while you're in the store, whether you're looking for your phone or whatever have you, what will happen a lot of times is that individuals who know that they are the ones that get called on about stealing something, what they will do is they will say, ooh, I don't know if I should keep my phone in a little pocket close by so I'm not digging around in my purse.
Yeah.
Doctor,
I've honestly done that. That's something I honestly do. Yeah.
And so when we are talking about healing and trying to change things in society, in order for you to understand what racial battle fatigue and how strong it could be, I use something that someone would look at and say it's very simple. That's just a simple thing. And believe me, I was going to go really harsh with certain things like being in certain towns, how even today we have sundown towns, meaning that if your skin is darker than a paper bag, you're not supposed to be in that town around this time. I've had people to say that doesn't exist anymore. Actually, there's a website, Lies, what is the book? Lies My Teachers Told Me, and I can't remember the author's name, and one of you may be able to remember him. But he keeps track of sundown towns, you know, that are still exist in 2020. So when people say that, you know, racism is over, what that does is that it increases the racial battle fatigue, because they know that I'm not being heard, I'm being invalidated about my experiences and what I'm feeling around those experiences. And you know, I can go on, but if you have any questions for me around this, I can answer some more. But the idea is that people just have, you know, I have people who would come in for therapy or just to sit and talk to figure out, how do I process this? You know, this anxiety that I have around little things like going shopping.
Yeah.
I
We'll
have a question.
we'll revisit that. I
And I
want to
think
move
Natalie
on.
was about to say something.
Go
I
right
have a
ahead.
I have a quick question, Cheryl. Two things. One, I think it's really important that you made the comment about the sundown towns, because I think what people aren't understanding is that you know, regions vary a great deal, and we tend to live in our sheltered world unless you're somebody who's moved around a lot. And having been I'm a California girl who briefly lived in South Dakota, so I have some experience seeing how Native Americans were treated. And then now I'm in Maryland, and Maryland is extremely different than particularly Northern California. And it's something that you might know intuitively, but until your boots on the ground, you don't really get to see kind of the daily. I'm basically in a former Southern, you know, Maryland had slavery, and so we have the vestiges here that you just don't get to experience when you live in California. And so I think it's just important to point out to people that just like people are different, regions are very, very different in both what they experience and their laws that govern them. So I think it's just great to think about it that way. But I had another question for you.
Before you move on, one of the things I want to say is, yeah, and so when we want to know the racial temperature of an area that we live in, and I don't mean the temperature like 101 like it is right now, but if you really want to understand the racial temperature, you have to talk to people who don't look like you in order for you to really understand it, because we're not doing any qualitative research studies or anything. It's the stories that will let you know whether or not your area has a problem, because a lot of times we don't even know it because it may not be captured by the police. You may not read the newspaper if they even list it. It's when you start talking to those individuals that you start hearing the stories. And too often their stories get so dismissed and where we say they did something wrong, or you remember 10 years ago you did something wrong, so that could be the reason why, you know. So many reasons to dismiss. And so I think to gauge what's happening in those regions is you have to talk to people who look different than you to find out. Yeah, thank you for that. And you had another thing you said?
I was just curious if there was a separate syndrome that they've identified for the trauma that comes from witnessing repeat sort of law enforcement abuses, because a lot as a law student, what we study in criminal law a lot of times is the way that communities react to law enforcement, and that it's very much colored by their experience. And I don't know if that's reached a kind of a syndrome sort of level. I can't imagine that it hasn't, or maybe it's just your traditional PTSD.
Oh, there's actually names. Yeah.
What's that?
There actually are names. It's vicarious trauma or secondary traumatization. And that's you watching. So just like right now, the reason why we see lots of people posting on social media to check on your friends of color right now is because they know that they're seeing these things taking place in society, and they are definitely being affected by it. Even right now, for those who are in therapy, therapists are really looking for those therapists who work with therapists, because the therapists are being there for everyone else. Someone needs to be there for them to be able to process it, especially if because their numbers have gone up as far as the number of clients they're receiving in. So that means if in a day they're seeing 10 clients, and if 8 of those clients are bringing you stories about their stress, the vicarious trauma that they have, then that one therapist has to hold all that in They need to put it somewhere. And so now think that that's just one day. They work 5 days a week. You know, so the vicarious trauma is something that, yeah, in the mental health world, we know all about. And we know that, you know, right now, we are really worried about individuals who work with others and not just therapists. I'm gonna tell you now, even as an educator, the same thing. We get students who are gonna come in, and those students are traumatized. They've been away from campus, and so they haven't had the space to have those dialogues. We know that vicariously, they're connecting experiences that they have had. They are connecting it to what they saw happening on in the news, to Floyd, to Aubrey, you know, to all of I mean, I can just keep going on and on. Right, but they're seeing all of those, and they're saying, "Wow, my incident was pretty similar to that. That could have been me." Right. And you know, we may say that that's hypothetical thinking. However, you have to look at how real it is, though. Right. So yeah, so it's called vicarious trauma or secondary trauma of seeing it. And so when people say, well, why did they run? Exactly. Well, obviously they ran because they've seen, they're in trauma in that moment. In that moment, stress, chronic stress and trauma is taking place. So I would run too because of the fact that I fear for my life at that point.
And if I could add, you know, oftentimes when we witness something and we find ourselves in that same situation, it's almost as if we know the ending. Yeah. And we're trying to change the ending of a situation. Right. And so that's a great deal of pressure because, again, when you were mentioning how when we leave our homes, what someone that is not of color may be considering versus that person that is of color. There's times when we go into our job and we say, man, I hope that I don't have to be passionate about something today. Because as a Black woman, oftentimes my passion is
confused with anger.
It's turned into anger. And then I can hear someone else that's not of color that's passionate and they're throwing their hands and they're slamming it on the desk. And I'm sitting there kind of thinking, that's interesting. And so we have to, you know, as a person of color, you know, we're oftentimes having to think about how we're going to enter a room, how we're going to leave our home, what we're going to tell our children. I can't just tell my nephews, hey, have a great day. I got to tell my nephews some other things to prepare them for what could possibly happen once they leave out of this house. And that's just the reality for people of color. It's just a reality. There's no argument around it.
And I was going to say exactly what you said. I just wrote it down to remind myself to say, yeah, the talk. You know, I often hear people say, well, you shouldn't traumatize your children by having to talk with them. And what I say is that actually the talk is because we want them to come home. Right. And so typically, you know, when we have, and I've shared this before, when firefighters prepare over and over again for what can happen if a fire takes place, CPR, we go through CPR over and over again to make sure that we know what to do in those situations. If we want our children to come home, sometimes we have to teach them exactly what to do when they're under stress, when that trauma comes up for them. And so we're trying to get it in that memory, right? So as soon as you see, you know, something taking place, here's what you do. And so we have those conversations. However, we have quite a few people who dismiss what parents have put in place to protect their children. And they say, you're terrifying your children. Actually, they're already terrified of what they're seeing in the world.
Yes.
You know, if I can add to that, what it makes me think of is what W.E.B. Du Bois would talk about, two-ness, or a double consciousness, or a multi-consciousness of people of color have to walk multiple worlds simultaneously, right, for our own survival. So we have to be able to know our own reality because it's our own reality, but we also have to know what the dominant white America sees as us. And how do they view us? And you can apply that to any dominant group, right? When we incorporate intersectionality to it. But in this case, as it relates to race, we have to be able to know how others may view us. Yeah. To be able to live and survive encounters in this world. And I also want to add, because I think this is really important, I love that Dr. Cheryl Williams-Jackson, that you incorporate this in your sessions, that so many folks of color are going through microaggressions and assaults and all of this oppression that is very macro, but also very micro in interpersonal relationships, that I believe that it's important that they see a therapist that understands that society is sick and society may be making you sick that you don't have the deficiency, that it's scary out there. And I think that's important because I have not come across enough therapists that really focus on that cultural literacy. And it's very much a cultural illiteracy, right? And to do that profession, you have to understand the world in which we live.
And you know, I question all the time, how do you become an educator? How do you become a psychologist or a therapist without having to go through that understanding of culture? You know, there isn't anything that a requirement in place to make sure that before you step in front of another human being, that you have an understanding around culture, whether you're picking up cultural competence, cultural humility, whatever you want to call it, you know, but even to have an understanding of what social justice means. If you're stepping in front of people, and Lisa Del Pitt has a book that's called Other People's Children. And it's all about how are you stepping in front of other people's children and not knowing about their background, but yet you dismiss it. Like you'll have what people will say, you know, oh, you really shouldn't use that language. You know, that's really a slang, and that it's just not acceptable. But yet what you just told that person is that I want to help you, provide you with mental health services, or I want to educate you. But by the way, the language that you're using, your mother got it wrong, your mother's got it wrong, and your mother's mother's got it wrong. So tell me now, why do I want to sit in front of you? Why do I want to hear what you have to share with me? So all of this, as we're talking about racial battle fatigue, we have to understand just how much of the pressure, you know, I think I've covered quite a few areas where racial battle fatigue fits in. But just know that when I talk about racial battle fatigue, I also talk about white fragility. And because I think that in talking about both of them, that's where we get the healing started. Is that that we have to have, that everyone falls into one of these areas. And for me, I read both. I read everything I can on white fragility, and I read everything I can on racial battle fatigue. And so the white fragility, it's all about what's stopping you as a person who has identified as white, or racially you're seen as white, and you're benefiting from privileges that you didn't ask for, but you were born into. And do any of your privileges, not that you throw away your privileges, because we all have some type of privileges,
Right.
but because of that, you have to begin to ask yourself, acknowledge one, that I have privilege, but the second step is to have to ask yourself, have you watched to see how your privilege may be oppressing someone else? Because that's what the work is. The work is for you to acknowledge that those places where it may be oppressing someone else and do something about it. So I'm going to use as an example something, because I always like pulling it away from the actual topic. And so for me, when I was going through school, I was already a professor. We get textbooks sent to us all the time. However, I had friends who would drop a class and was going to not be able to graduate when I graduated because they couldn't afford the textbooks. Now, that was my privilege, was that I got the textbook. I never had to worry about getting textbooks, whereas they did, which meant it would have held them back. Now, I acknowledged and saw that privilege and realized I need to do something about that. That's what I mean when I'm talking about, you know, when it comes to white fragility, is that we have to look at where those privileges are and be able to step up and say, I have to check and see, is that holding someone back, that privilege? And if so, what can I do about it? And remember, we all have privileges: socioeconomic status, language. If you speak English in this society, in the United States, you have that privilege of that language. You know, so we all have them, but because we're talking about, you know, the most critical topic in the United States. We are a young country that has not learned how to function, or when it comes to race. And so race is the thing that it just seems like the virus that we have right now that we have to cure.
Thank you for that, Dr. Jackson. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I know that we're on a time frame here, and I want to respect all of your time. I would like to just ask you now, Melissa, just after hearing all of that, I'm just curious, as with you being an ally in the Black Lives Matter movement, what have some of your responses been from your friends and family that know that you support this movement? How has that affected you, either negatively or positively? How are things going with you, knowing that you're so outspoken with Black Lives Matter?
on your all of your platforms?
Yeah, well, with my family, nothing has really changed because they know I've been interested in this for a long time. I've been bringing up conversations about race for a few years, and we don't always agree, but it's been a good learning experience just to have those conversations, just to see actually how my belief system developed. They are the foundation of like how I formed my identity. And so it's never been when I don't agree or I feel they're being appropriate, like me against them, but how can we change our perspective? And it's been very much like, we're gonna grow together. Even if I think I'm further along, you know, we're just in this together. And so they've supported me, and they know that this is important to me, and they've come a long way since when I first opened these conversations. And so that's definitely an important reason to just talk with your family, because they will come along, but in time and over many conversations. And with my friends, a lot of
Did
them.
you want to add anything?
Does somebody want to say something?
Oh no, my screen froze, so I thought you stopped talking. Sorry.
With my friends, a lot of them have kind of been the opposite, which surprised me because we very much are aligned in our beliefs, but they've really just pulled away and distanced themselves from me. So over the last few weeks, I've just been asking myself, how can I kind of reconnect with them and build that bridge and bring them back in? Because if I just say, well, they don't get it or they don't want to be part of it, then I haven't really accomplished anything. Nothing has changed. I've just left them where they are. So I think that I've made a lot of mistakes in how I've been kind of reaching out to my friends, and even like on my platforms being very open about this. I was very passionate about it, but I don't want to alienate the people who I want to like kind of step into this journey with me. And so I've just really been reflecting on how can I do better in that regard. And that's been a lot of what this is to me too, just constantly asking, how can I do better? Not just in unpacking like my own prejudices, but in being a better ally and getting more people involved, making people feel welcome, and just feeling like I'm really trying to, you know, bring people in and not end up alone at the end of this. And it's uncomfortable.
And that's hard. I'm sure that's a real challenge.
It's a challenge, but I know it's such a small challenge compared to what it is to live with racism, and just kind of keeping that perspective in mind. And I just believe so much that we need these changes that I think that kind of energizes me and keeps me going. And, you know, I do want all of us to kind of be in this together. And so it's uncomfortable, but I think it's learning to be with the discomfort and know that at this point that's never going to go away, because we can't go back to how things were. And so I'm just going to have to be uncomfortable in this new normal, but also appreciate that it's getting us to a better place.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's the dream. Professor Berru, with Black Lives Matter getting approval globally right now, why do you think that brown people are really resonating with what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement? What do you think is causing that camaraderie there?
Well, thank you. First, I just want to acknowledge the native land that we're all on. I know that we're in different locations, but it's all native land. And I think it's important, by talking about Black Lives Matter and social justice, we have to acknowledge the land in which we're on. So first, I want to be able to give recognition to the Yokut people, that the land that I'm on right now. And then to answer your question, is that one is the younger, I think there's a generational difference, one. You know, Generation Z is the most the most culture bending group, the most unapologetic group. They are very vocal, and they're like, no, we're not going to do it like that. They do stand on the shoulders of all the other generations, but they are, in fact, I think that this generation, it says, we're going to do it our way, just like every generation does. Right? It is no surprise that young people are leading this movement. When you look at the history of social movements, in particular in the United States, it's young people. It has always been young people. And so it's their time. And I'm hoping that we're able to support them and play a role, and be, you know, be by their side. But also I want to be able to say that the Latinx population or family, we're not new to oppression. When you look at the histories of the Latinx family, when we look at the history of our names being changed, our religion taken from us, the eradication of our culture, forced assimilation, and then encouraged assimilation. I teach a Mexican culture class at MJC, and 99% of my students don't know who they are. They don't know who they are. It is not by accident that they don't know who they are, nor do they know their history, right? Why don't you know your history? Who took it from you? Who kept it from you? Right? So there's these bigger questions, and we have these parallels: lynching in the Southwest of Mexican Americans, segregation, xenophobia. So the anti-immigrant sentiment, mass deportation, right? Children in cages. We have children in cages. We have children in cages in 2020, right? The dehumanization of referencing some folks as illegal aliens, illegal human beings, illegal aliens, subhuman.
Yeah.
We share that commonality with our Black family of the process of being dehumanized. When a group of people is dehumanized, then the dominant group feels justified that they can do whatever they want because they're less than, they're inferior to. So we share that history of dehumanization, mass incarceration, racial profiling, police terror, police murder. So you have these parallels that I think that some of us are aware of, either through being educated and being taught. Some of us know it viscerally. It's like the native drum, boom, boom, boom. And you can almost like, I don't know why, but I feel pulled to this.
Yeah.
That ancestral memory from native people, from original people from all over the world is like, I resonate with this, but I don't know why, but I feel it. And then you also have folks that are seeing the humanity, right? That what's happening to folks. I believe we've seen such horrible, horrific violence, and with Mr. Floyd, you know, when you see a cop put his knee to the neck of someone, to Mr. Floyd, a Black man, for 8.46 minutes?
Yeah, 8.46.
That's a long time, and it's captured. And so I also think that it kind of rings the humanity within all of us. And I also want to say, you know, I always go macro, micro. So kind of all of these notions of these similarities that we have. But at the same time, I want to zoom in, and the personal, you know, the political is the personal is the political. So, and for me, it's like, I think of my loved ones. I think of my companion and his children. I think of my mentors. I think of my friends. I think of my students. I think of strangers that I don't know. See, my Black family is more than Black bodies. They're people. And when you know people, you see their humanity. They're no longer just politics. It's no longer just Black bodies. It's like, no, that could be my friend. That could be my student. That's someone. That's someone, right? And so, so I'm very passionate about that on a very personal level as well, because I feel that I see the humanity in folks, and also see the parallels of injustice and inequality and oppression that we share. We are natural allies.
Right.
We are natural allies. And my job is to really educate the Latinx population because they don't know the history. So oftentimes they don't know those parallels. They don't know that many of us are mixed with not only European, because they know the Spanish part, but they don't know that they're Native. They don't know they're African. You should see that when in the classroom when I tell them that. They're like, what? And I say, well, just go to your family function. You'll see the color line. Why do you see the color line? My grandpa looked like a black man. My grandma looked like a white woman. My mom is bronze. That's history informing today. So my responsibility is to educate my brown family to be able to disrupt their anti-blackness, because we're not off the hook. And it's not oppression Olympics.
Right.
So I feel very passionate about educating, disrupting, and disrupting any type of inequality, disrupting anti-blackness, and to remind people who they are. And not only that, on top of that, I'll end on this note, is and you all hear me say this all the time, and I'm sorry
to interrupt you really quickly, Professor Berru. Are you guys able to view Professor Berru right now? I'm having a little issue with my computer. Do you all see Professor Berru?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to be sure.
We can see her now. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to be sure. Sorry, go ahead, Professor.
But it's like I sound like a broken record, but I do this on purpose. People need to realize the original family. The original family is African. The mother of civilization is a black woman. The father of civilization is a black man. That is important.
But that's very difficult for people to, especially where I live. It's very difficult for them to accept that and to accept that as factual. And I believe that is part of these difficult conversations, is that
take a cultural anthropology class.
Yeah, I just feel like that's part of the problem here where I live, is that people don't want to accept certain things that have been proven as fact. And I believe that that's what divides people, because I always hear why don't you get over it? That was so many years ago. Like, I mean, come on, like, this is 2020. It's very difficult to get over it when you don't even acknowledge what has really happened and how civilization began. It's a very complicated.
Can I add something onto that?
Yeah.
That's kind of the result of being allowed to take a complete chunk out of history and teach it the way that you want it to. For many of us who are in our 40s, my history about Black people started with slavery. They didn't talk about kings. They didn't talk about queens. They didn't talk about that the first millionaire was a Black king. We didn't know things like that unless we had parents, and I was fortunate enough to have a mom that really educated me on who I was as a Black person. I was born in Los Angeles. I remember in my preschool and in my elementary schools that my principal was a Black woman and my teacher was a Black woman. And I think that we had Hispanic teachers as well. And so being able to look around and see people that looked like you gave you just this sense of confidence, because you knew who you were. And so it's interesting that you speak about the importance of knowing who we are, Melanie. I did a workshop, I think it was about 2 years ago, and it was called A Healthy Relationship Begins With You. And the most that people took away from that after it was over, and the thing that people took away from that was saying, I did not realize how much of an impact my history had on the person that I am today. And so if that can work in a positive light, then that's a wonderful thing, right? But we have to take into consideration that oftentimes our childhood trauma has been racial, due to racial profiling, due to being called out of our names, due to being the only Black person, the only Black friend, having to constantly educate your friends, having to tell people, don't touch my hair. I mean, just basic, fundamental, common sense things. And so when we're, and I believe with this generation that we have coming up, one of the beautiful things is that they are identifying with who they are, because there's this shift in who they're spending time with. I remember being in high school and it would be all the Black kids over here, all the Mexican kids over here, all the Asian kids over here. And if we played a sport together, that's how we knew each other. And that's not what it's looking like. And so, yes, this cause is really being driven. And I'm so grateful that it's being driven by our young people. But what I'm the most grateful is is that people are realizing who they are much earlier on, and they are falling in their leadership positions much earlier on. And that's what has been a great issue when we think about the state of America, is that no one has been able to fairly hear about the greatness of who their ancestors were.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have anything to identify. And we should be able to identify that we didn't just evolve from slavery, that we evolved from something much richer and something much greater than slavery. It's a wonderful thing to know that our young people
You're breaking up a lot right now.
Well, it's a wonderful thing for our young people to be able to take advantage of the opportunity to really learn their history and to know who they are.
Yeah, and if I could just add, so much of what we're taught here is actually focused on my ancestors and my history, and from a very distorted perspective. And I think that's where a lot of white people are struggling right now, is it's been told in a way that makes us out to be heroes and gives us a kind of sense of like entitlement that a lot of white people don't realize that they have. And
Tasha, can I say a couple of things too?
Yes. Melanie, Melissa, did I mute you
it
out?
muted. I don't know if it.
Oh.
She's muted again.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry.
Try when you're in, Melissa. It may be.
Okay, I think I'm back.
Could you please, because I would really like to hear the last portion of what you said.
I was just gonna say that like my identity was formed through this distorted perspective focused on people who look like me. And so I feel that what LaKiesha and Melanie are saying is so important, that we need to bring in the full scope of the history that includes everybody and also tells it in a very honest way. It has not been told in an honest way. It's told in a way of almost like we had a right to come here and do the things that we did, and they were heinous and they were awful. And we really need to think about like, what did that lead to me thinking in myself, and like, how did that really develop into my psyche? And I really need to like untangle myself from all the things that I've been taught. And then we really need to incorporate all this other history that is so important and has just been smashed kind of in the name of white supremacy.
Wait, okay.
Can I add a couple of things?
Yes, I'm trying to get you in the spotlight here. I'm trying to make sure that I've got you spotlighted before you speak.
That's unnecessary. I look better small. I'm gonna talk and you just keep me small.
Uh-oh, hold on.
Well, she's muted.
I think you hit the mute button. And Natalie, there you go.
Okay, am I good?
Yeah,
yes.
You're
Just keep me small. So just kind of building on what everyone said. So and we talked about this briefly last time, but you know, that while movements in general the younger people tend to push things forward, what's particularly unique about what's going on now is that the younger generations now are just more educated, and they've grown up in inclusion. When you think about what we grew up under, I mean, even having gay marriage be kind of something that you don't even question. When we grew up is a time when everybody was kind of carved off in their respective corners. And so the younger generations is statistically very different than many of the generations in the past. And so I have a lot of hope in what is going to be accomplished from that type of demographic. And then I also wanted to build on your question about kind of people of color and why this is resonating. I saw a civil rights advocate speaking this week from Pakistan, and she made an interesting correlation between what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement and honor killings in Pakistan. And I mean, it's a very similar sort of correlation. A young woman just does something even slightly out of the norm. It's not supposed to happen, but it's still very much happening.
Yes. And
she's just killed, and that's it. And the violation that she could commit is so minuscule relative to our terms. And so you think about that kind of trauma of not even the big purse thing, but if somebody sees you with lipstick, or you happen to touch a man on the back that's not your husband or your intended husband, any little error that could cause your murder and it not even be considered murder. It's an honor killing. And so it was just really interesting for her to draw that correlation and say why this movement here is resonating so much with what's going on around the world. And the same statistics come into play for younger people around the world. All of the younger generations around the world are more educated and more inclusive now. And then the last thing I would say, just about kind of from a personal note about knowing who you are, there's something really beautiful about knowing who you are and then allowing it to help you know others. When my family moved to South Dakota, my mom, as you know, is from El Salvador. And at that time when we were living in South Dakota, it was the Sioux, my mom, and then the white people. And the white people didn't know, you could tell that they didn't know what to do with my mom because no one else looked or sounded like my mom. You know, I don't know that anybody who had an accent the way that she does. And so even though I'm, you know, half white and half Latina, I felt a kindred spirit with the Sioux. Because I saw the way my mother was looked at, and I saw and I heard what was said about the Native American children that I was in school with. And there's something really beautiful about drawing a full circle between there should be nothing else tying me to the Sioux, technically speaking.
I think Professor Berru would beg to differ with that, I believe.
Well, right. Yeah. Well, once you get enough DNA swabs going around, we're all going to know. I mean, it will be irrefutable where we all come from. But I just think it's really important to kind of let your information about yourself allow you to connect with other similar people, similar enough, but not, you know, not exactly, because that's how we truly learn. My whole thing is it's all about diversity. We will not be forwarded as a civilization by groupthink and by like-mindedness. We really require the full quilt of what human diversity has to offer. So I just think that's just beautiful when you can let your own information about yourself inform and allow you to connect with other cultures.
Yes. Natalie, now that you're speaking this, I want to go ahead and ask you a question from the law side. So just going to switch it up just for a quick second and ask you, why is the concept of defunding law enforcement systems being discussed right now? What does it mean, and is it realistic?
Right. So I think, you know, I've thought about this a lot. I guess my first goal when I hear this question come up is to take out the defunding. The defunding is like it's a great word for a poster if you're carrying in a protest. It's volatile. There's a hostility to it. What it really is just simply reform, which I think there aren't many people that would be able to dispute because the numbers don't support disputing it. It's another thing that's irrefutable is that there's disparate proportions of African Americans incarcerated, period. No one, regardless of whatever part of the spectrum you come from, you can't argue that the numbers don't lie.
Right.
And so really what the talk is, it's about reform, and prison reform has been talked about for a long time. But what once you go through kind of the legal education, you understand the areas of discretion at every point in the way. I mean, incarceration is kind of like the end, you know, the end result, but there's discretion at every level. So what we're talking about now is police brutality, which is one level of discretion, boots on the ground, to incarceration, which is taking somebody's life away from them and setting them on a path that's very hard to recover from. And so what people are trying to encourage is for people to rethink what law enforcement actually means. What's the purpose of it? And what is it being used for? And the other numbers that you can get this from the Bureau of Justice, BJS has this on their website. You know, the response is police typically are the violent response, the need to respond to violent acts is 5% of all of their calls. It's minuscule relative to, it's a
Wow.
very small
Wow.
portion. And so what has happened is we've replaced mental health responses with law enforcement. So if I'm suicidal and I call, I don't want a policeman to show up and try to help me figure out why I want to live. I
Right.
want a mental health specialist. And so what we've done is we've over empowered one part of the system, and we've nearly eliminated mental health. I mean, a lot of people talk about replacing the mental institutions with incarceration, and there is some of that. I mean, you kind of just change the header over the door with people who can't function in the system. They're not getting the help that they are, so they end up in another type of system. And so the goal is, one, to help people not react to this idea that we're saying let's get rid of all cops and so you just fend for yourself. That's not what it's about. It's just about figuring out where the dollars should be spent and what are the appropriate responses for the types of calls that are truly coming in to quote unquote law enforcement.
I appreciate that explanation, because even just hearing the kids talk, my teenagers amongst their own kids, they're thinking that defunding the police means to actually get rid of police officers, and that it's just going to be a police officer free state, no policing anywhere. So
Right.
I appreciate the clarity on that.
Yeah, and they, I mean, and it's important to know that the history, and I think this is where, particularly where advocates for the African American movements come from, is that law enforcement didn't always look like this. It was private and or volunteer in the beginning, and then it became kind of its own career sort of path in the 20s round, and there was a lot of politics behind why it became kind of a separate entity. And obviously when it comes to prisons, we've privatized some of that, and some of that's public, some of it's private. But you know, what's important for everyone to think about, whether they believe in doing it for justice and equality, or whether they just want to think about it from a practical standpoint. And this is why I think it can speak to everybody. Every one of those police brutality settlements that happen behind closed doors, we pay for.
Right.
We pay for them. That police brutality is funded by taxpayer money, period. And having worked for a governmental organization, I had to see that. I worked for the, you know, I worked for the Maryland state government for a period of time. And you learn about how the state indemnifies law enforcement. So not only do they have immunity, qualified immunity from civil suits, but when something does happen, their union is basically contracted in an indemnification agreement, which means that when you, I was going to use a bad word, when you screw up, the state pays for it, right? And so it's important for people to understand they're paying for it. They are paying for, so if you think it's okay for police to go around running amok, and that we don't need better training, and that we don't need to have the right people responding to the right types of things, then don't complain about what other resource you don't have your taxpayer money going to, because that's what it's going to. The settlements are happening all the time. We hear in the newspaper about the big ones, but they're happening all the time.
Could I just add something to that really quick?
Yes, absolutely.
I would just like to say that I think what Natalie's been talking about also leads into the importance of local elections and knowing who your elected officials are. Especially here, I have heard a lot of them saying things about defund the police and kind of repeating the misinformation that you were giving, and they're intentionally not clarifying. And so we really need to know who our officials are and who's representing us and what they're telling us and how they're using that information. And local elections are just really important in regards to that.
Melissa, I really appreciate that, because it also goes back to something that Melanie was saying, which is this problem is going to be a micro to a macro, and eventually it's going to meet in the middle. It's going to be grassroots, because we will take control of our communities, and we will or will not allow certain things to happen in our communities. And then we will try to instill the macro picture, which is the appropriate federal responses and the other types of things that we want to have in place. They both need to happen. They both need to happen, but we very much can control our own backyards. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. I am not trying to cut you off, but I want to make sure that I get to Miss LaKiesha McDonald. I just want to ask you, LaKiesha, um, can you explain why Black Lives Matter is much more than police brutality? Because a lot of people that I've come into contact with are feeling like the reason that the Black Lives Matter movement is not what they want to hear about is because we are the ones that are saying defund the police, and that it's only about the police. Could you explain to the best of your ability what Black Lives Matter really means besides police brutality, just the history of, just explain why Black Lives Matter?
Certainly.
Oh, I muted you. I muted you. I'm so sorry. Let me unmute you. Did I unmute you?
I got it.
Thank you.
So let me just start, if I could just tag on just a little bit with the defunding of the police before I jump in. You know, this is not anything that's new, by the way. There are other cities that have done this and they've had great success. And so
when you say they've done this, you mean the Black Lives Matter movement? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean in defunding the police departments. So it's happened before in other cities. Now I'm going to go into answering the question that you asked me. So Black Lives Matter is it's a network of like-minded individuals that are advocating for basic human rights. Basic human rights, social justice, racial equity, racial equality, and then most importantly, they are advocating in a very radical and revolutionary way to go against various forms of racism. And that's the business of Black Lives Matter. And we hear a lot of different narratives as to what they're doing and that they're causing all of these riots and they're doing that. And what we're not taking into consideration is that with any type of large movement, there are going to be rogue groups out there that are going to find their way in to do what they, to complete their own agenda. And that's the reality of it. And what white America has always done is that they've played this game with it where they'll say, but look at this, but look at this, but look at this. And then everybody turns and everybody starts paying attention to that. And I think that's what a lot of people were banking on. And that hasn't happened. Black Lives Matter has turned on the spotlight on the whole nation. And they're saying that there is no gray area here. You are either opposed without a shadow of a doubt to racism, or you are supporting it. Whether you are doing it verbally or whether you are an actual racist, because there is no in between, there is no middle ground.
And then I have to ask on that, Melissa, do you agree with that there is no in between? Do you feel like there is no in between, that you either Black Lives Matter or you're racist? Because that's what I think is happening here, is that people have to choose a side. And is there a way to get the conversations going where there is no side choosing, but there's somehow we can all come together? Like, because otherwise how do we stop this? That's the whole point of this difficult discussions, because if there's only a one side and the other side, we're just going to keep this going forever. Is there any medium at all? Any of you can chime in. I just that's why I wanted to do this
agreeing
discussion
with LaKiesha, and I think what I've been learning is the problem comes down to people see racism as like a binary. You're either a good person or you're a bad person, but you can hold racist beliefs and be a good person. Like, and that's a lot of what I was kind of alluding to when I was having these conversations with my family. Of course, I see them as good people, but they don't have always beliefs that I think are ideal or perfect. And those are the things that we really need to get through, is that, you know, everybody is going to kind of fall into that spectrum somewhere, but it is a spectrum of like, how deep are these beliefs in you? But we all have them to some degree. I mean, it's kind of impossible to grow up in this system and not take it in some way.
Well, actually though, in regards
sorry, let me get you back on spotlight. I'm sorry.
Okay. Actually, just in a little bit of a response, just a little bit of a response to that. We all have prejudices. And that's very different from racism, because prejudices don't necessarily begat hate. the way that racism does.
Oh, that's good.
A person, being prejudiced of someone, or having a stereotype, or a way that you equate, this is how this particular demographic of people acts, that can be corrected.
Okay.
Right? Now, can racism be corrected? Well, we have to first identify it and really say that it is a mental illness. It is a mental illness, and what it begats is hate. And hate turns into what we have been witnessing for the past few years, now that we can all see it because it's all over the internet. And so there is a clear distinction. And that's why I said there is no gray area. You are either opposed to it or you are okay with it.
Okay, and with that, I want to say that we are exactly at 8 o'clock. Is everyone okay with going forward a little longer, or is there anyone that has to go out? Okay, thank you. So go ahead, continue, LaKiesha.
And so when I say that a spotlight has kind of been shining on our nation right now, people are coming from under the rocks and being exposed. And it's a lot of people who we were talking earlier about, man, I didn't know that my friends thought this way, or I didn't know this. And you can no longer say, well, if you're a racist, you can't hide behind anything anymore and say, well, I just didn't know. And so what's happening where we're at right now today is, I think I said it the last time that we talked, is that the ability to continue to live in the bliss of ignorance has expired. That time has expired. It is too easy for you to become informed enough to make an educated decision on what the right thing to do is. And so Black Lives Matters is holding you as an individual accountable.
Yeah.
They're holding you accountable. They're saying that if you see that something is wrong, you must say something to your cousin, to your mother, to your father, to your grandma.
Yeah.
It is your responsibility to be a part of this shift of change. Now, if I'm the person, the majority who has been benefiting from the oppression,
it's hard to accept.
It's more than it's hard to accept.
Yeah, it's almost impossible.
It means that you are basically saying to me that you are going to completely and totally dismantle and destroy the very foundation that I'm currently standing on.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the intent is.
Can I say
Natalie, let me get you on the spotlight.
I don't want to be in the spotlight.
I know you don't. Too bad.
I would say to that point, what's even worse than what LaKiesha is proposing is that the people who are fighting this actually aren't standing on any great benefit any longer. They just don't understand why it was taken away from them. They don't understand that, economically speaking, that corporations have outsourced jobs, that there's so many other reasons why their lives are no longer, for whatever reason, why they want to put a death grip on what they think they're trying to preserve. Right? Gay people can get married now. Oh my God, Christian values out the window. All of these things that they see as we make progress, just chipping away at the fiber of what they believe is just a value system that is rigid and cannot change. But as far as the quote unquote benefit, the world is changing. The world will never go back. You're not going to be able to even if you're a white man, you're not going to be able to not go to college and have a good job in 20 years. There's nothing else for you to sit back on any longer.
I see.
And so it's even worse to hold people back. And it's not even a zero-sum game. It's not by holding them back you get something. You get nothing. You get nothing by holding back other than perpetuating a horrible, horrible legacy.
Well, here's another aspect of the power of the movement. We are also being exposed to the positive Black people that, had it not been for something like this, we may not know. 2020, you are seeing the most Black millionaires that you have ever seen. You are seeing the most Black entrepreneurs that you have ever seen that are putting their hands back in their community and pulling up. When we are out here and we're saying to the Black communities that not only are we supporting you, not only does your life matter, but it matters so much that we're going to rise up from our level of comfortability and we're going to hit those streets with you. Do you understand the power that is inserted in those communities? Do you understand how the Black on Black crimes begin to increase as they begin to see people who look like them and sound like them be their role models, but not just in their neighborhoods, but globally, you're seeing the progress. And so that's fearful for people who, like you said, are used to holding people back or putting their neck on a whole community and stopping them from breathing. And what the world is witnessing right now is life being spoken over these dead communities that have been so neglected.
Yeah.
And that is going to create this new powerful community. Another thing that we've learned with Black Lives Matter, and I'm just about done,
Okay.
is the power, and I'm almost done, honestly. It's the power of our dollar, right?
And your vote.
Exactly. And and knowing that we don't have to take the traditional routes anymore.
Mhm.
We don't have to, if we can't get, if a particular college doesn't want us, man, we've got HBCUs.
Yeah.
You understand? So our opportunities have changed. And I don't know if we would have ever been this enlightened had this movement not happened the exact same way it happened.
Okay.
You know,
That's
to
good.
add to
Can I
that,
just
LaKiesha,
add to that about that, you know, sometimes it came to my mind as LaKiesha was talking, is that sometimes when you have to share power, you know, that sharing feels like you're losing your power.
Right.
And that's what we see happening also when we see others who are fighting against the movement, is that there's this big fear that we're losing the, and not realizing, no, sharing does not mean you're losing. You're sharing it at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to stress that, you know, Black Lives Matter is the modern day civil rights movement. It is the modern day civil rights movement. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to mention a little bit about the importance of power. It's not all of it. I don't believe it's all about hate. I think that there's a portion of it that is about hate, but it's about power. It's about power and maybe hate and also greed. So history informs today. The way that this country was created was out of greed.
Right.
The stealing of people, the stealing of land, and hoarding. That, and then the entitlement, and then passing down that wealth from generation to generation to generation. And now people, and then throughout those years, folks of color and marginalized groups are demanding power or demanding respect and civil rights. And here we are in 2020 saying that doesn't fly.
Right.
And what we're seeing is we're seeing white panic, white anxiety, and white fragility of like, oh my gosh, I'm losing what is mine. Like agreed entitlement.
Yeah.
To what is mine. And it's not. We're on stolen land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Go
I just
ahead,
love to
Melissa.
back that up too, that I think for a lot of people like myself, we really don't realize how much of a sense of entitlement we have gained from all of the things that we have been taught through history, and how that's still playing out. Because Tasha, you said people said to you, oh, this happened so long ago, but there's been a chain reaction of things that are still happening because of that. And for us, you know, it can just be like, did I deserve every job I got? Was I always the most qualified person? Or did I just take it because, you know, I looked like the person they wanted to fill that role? Did I take these apartments, you know, because I fit the demographic of the neighborhood? And I've never questioned before a lot of things that I got, and just, I did kind of have that sense of entitlement of like, I want this, so I'm not going to wonder who's not getting it instead of me. And those things are definitely still happening. And like, we really do need to look at that. And that is stressing a lot of people out right now, but we just got to get through it.
Yeah. And I think that I like that you're sharing that, you know, that question about whether I got the job because I think people may hear this and even hear what you just shared and think, well, why wouldn't, they may not even question it. And for me, I would say, talk to those who do not look like you to find out, is that something that actually happens? Because they'll tell the stories. Like, you will have someone come and tell you a story, and I'm talking about me, where, where you go to be doing an internship, and it's in the Black community, and on their wall, there's no one that looks like me. And the response that I got was, I don't know if we'll be able to get clients for you. And I'm sitting there going, but you're sitting in an area that's predominantly Black. What does that mean? That you won't be able to get, but that wasn't their reason. Their reason was they had never, when I looked at the wall, I realized, I went, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
You've never had anyone Black here before.
Right.
It's not about not getting the clients.
Yeah.
So we have to think about that. And then I think a couple of you brought up about history. And you have to remember, I think that's the other thing I want to add to what you all said, was that history is now being told from the other narrative.
Right. Yeah. That's
and
deep.
so,
that's very deep. Yes.
And some of you have said there's importance in knowing the history.
Yes.
So the more we know that history, the more you have individuals who are standing up and saying, you know what? I am enough.
Yeah.
My ancestors were enough.
Yeah.
Whereas the story has been told before, growing up in school, I was told that, slavery was needed in order to build this nation. And it's like,
yeah, that's how we're taught. That's how we're taught.
But what do you think that does to me as a Black female,
a Black person,
who's being impressed, whose mind is being, influenced?
Yeah.
What does that create for me to think about myself?
Right.
Whereas and the only reason I think that I grew up knowing that what I was hearing was not correct was because my parents intentionally had Saturday school that taught me something different, and would have me to go back and tell that teacher, get it right, because you got it wrong.
Yeah. I have one small little story. I'll make it very, very quick, because I'll right now I will look at trying to wrap this up by 8:30. And Dr. Jackson, I would like you to close us out with some breathing techniques that you're kind of famous for. But I have one little small story. When I was in 7th grade in junior high, I we were assigned to write about a queen, a leader, and I wrote about Nefertiti, and that she was an African. And the teacher, when I got turned it in, he's like, you're totally inaccurate in all of your information. This is totally wrong, blah, blah, blah. Well, I was dumbfounded. And I was raised, like I said, well, I didn't say this on this actual recording, but I was born in Alabama, and my mom and dad moved from Alabama to make a better life for us here in California. So they had all kinds of books and all kinds of educational things for my dad was an avid reader. And he was the one that said, you're going to write about Nefertiti. Well, my dad went back to the school and spoke to the teacher. I had that kind of a father.
Yes, he did.
And said, you are absolutely incorrect. She is from Africa. And this report is completely accurate. I've brought the books with me so that I could share them with you. And the thing that made it so awesome is that it was a great conversation. This is where I believe I get this kind of idea about deeper conversations with all different people, is that the dynamic was that when my dad taught this to this particular teacher, he allowed me to read my story in front of the class. I was the only one in 7th grade that got to read my story out loud about this particular queen. And so, I mean, it's just funny how history is taught in a certain way, and then it's been taught for so long that we believe it. And so that when something new comes in that you haven't heard of, especially for people that are not Black, when they hear a different story or a different version, they're like, that's not true. That could have never happened. When in fact, they just never learned it because we are not taught these things in school. And so I don't know who it was that wanted to speak next, but Natalie, let me put you on the spotlight, Natalie.
I just want to say, I think it's for the people who haven't spent a lot of time with the history of the African American experience in this country, it's easy to focus just on the slavery portion, right? Because it seems like the most horrific, right? But what I find particularly disturbing is the post Civil War era. that people are unaware of the atrocities that continued to happen, and that the South did not change, other than now people are just poor and on the outside and not even getting their potato. The little kids don't even have the potato sack to wear that they used to have to wear, because you've just disenfranchised them, and you're trying to keep them as cheap labor. They're free and they're conflicted because they're being told that they're free, but you've got a whole system that's saying, oh, you're not leaving, we need cheap labor to stay here, and literally holding people back from migrating out, and lynchings that weren't even, they weren't even, no one was ever convicted for a lynching, and they didn't start to look at those until World War I.
Right.
And so it's mind-boggling to me that we would just focus on the slavery portion of the history, when the real hatred comes out when you're now no longer benefiting from the work, and now you're just trying to do it to keep some system in place because you want to keep people in their place, because you're scared that and it's all fear-based, right? It's all fear-based of whatever they perceive to be happening and changing. But that whole era, and what continues to happen, and I've been like thinking recently about the modern day lynching, right? Isn't Floyd really the modern day lynching? You're basically proudly killing somebody in front of other people and putting the body on display and saying, don't try this. If you try this, this will happen too. And everyone's scared into submission. When people ask why, how can people stand there and watch that? Because they don't want.
I have had so many white friends ask me, who was recording it? Why didn't they just get down there? And I'm like, you can't do that. You cannot, African Americans can't just go in there and be like, get off of him. They're like, well, if I was there, I would do. But that's because your mentality has been that you're allowed to do that. We have not been able to do that. I've had so many calls where people say, Tasha, I watched the George Floyd video, and I'm just like, who's the people recording this? How come that guy was saying, hey, he can't breathe? Why didn't he just jump in there and knock the cop off? I'm like, so everybody there would be shot? Like, it just doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that.
Can I just say this as well? The modern day lynching is in 2020 is 5 Black men that were found hanging from trees 2 weeks ago.
Well, there's real lynching too. I understand that. Yeah.
So when we're talking about modern day lynching, if I could just add this one last thing, and I'll be brief, I promise. One thing that I would really, really strongly encourage is pay attention to who your educators are for your students. I mean, for your children. It's really, really important. And that's another reason why I actually support the defunding of police, so that funds can be allocated back into education so that we can dismantle that curriculum as well. But the reason why I say that is because we have to be mindful not to let history repeat itself, and be mindful who's teaching our children. I'll share this with you really quick. I read a post from an educator, and I think she teaches junior high or elementary, and one of her posts stated, and I shared this with Tosh, one of her posts stated that 90 or 75% of African American children cannot read. Mm. And that is due to the fact that they don't have fathers in the house.
That's literally the post.
And I'm thinking to myself.
And she's a teacher.
She's a teacher. And I'm thinking to myself, for someone who isn't on social media or who is not friends with her, so you're going to send your child of color to her. And they are going to enter that classroom already at a deficit with how she is going to begin instructing them.
Because she already thinks
she is going to be teaching from the perspective of the fact that there's a great possibility that they cannot read. Therefore, I should start here.
Yeah.
And not only is that just so inaccurate, but the fact that she was bold enough to just throw it out there on social media means that you believe that. And so you have to be mindful with who you're sending your kids to. And I'll end with that. Please go look at your teachers, your children's teachers' posts on Facebook, because people are being who they are.
Yes.
They are showing you. And we must believe them the first time, folks.
Yes.
And I will add to that there's nothing subtle about that. She's trying to link it to something that was within the control by blaming it on the fathers. That there's nothing subtle or kind or accurate or anything about that post. That is specifically to try to defer the
Exactly.
blame.
Yeah.
Because
say,
how many white children come from broken families?
Right.
How many Hispanic children come from broken families? Right? And so
Right.
we know that that's pretty common in the United States of America. And we also know that children who can't read, they are in all different shades.
Yeah.
But to do that, it's dangerous. That is one of the most dangerous types of racism.
yes.
And LaKiesha, I think that really backs up why you said it's so important that everybody is either with Black Lives Matter or you're against it, because this racism is in every corner of society. It's everywhere. We need to be standing up to a lot of people, not just the police. The police are the face of what's happening right now because they have the power to end lives, but it really is so much more than that. It's just everywhere. And we really all need to kind of get behind it and be ready to call people out, call out our teachers,
Yes.
call out our neighbors, call out anybody who's, holding back this movement, because that is holding people's lives back. It's just such a destructive force, and we have to be ready to call it out everywhere.
Thank you for saying that.
And get some evidence behind me. I mean, I'm going to be very lawyerly about it. There's nothing like trying to refute somebody's argument with numbers. And you can say you should be, and I believe, from a justice perspective, it's overwhelming, and so therefore you need to be on the right side, and the right side is recognizing it, acknowledging it, and doing what you can. But for the people who don't, like, for instance, for every picture of a police brutality, that person goes out and finds a picture of somebody who is hitting a cop, or to try to counterbalance, right? Because that somehow controls it. And then for every 1 + 1 means, oh, there's nothing going on here.
Right.
And just the numbers just don't lie. The numbers
Right.
don't lie. And so you need to be armed with those. And there's a clear path to it. I mean, this is not a mysterious thing. This is methodical, thought out oppression, period.
Before you got on the call, you came in a little late. That's what we were discussing, because I had a friend that was comparing, when there's a Black person attacked, there's a white person attacked. And so it becomes this tit for tat kind of thing. And
Yep. As if that writes the numbers, if that somehow gets it,
right.
resolves it.
Right. So with that, I hate to wrap it up. I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. We've gone 21 minutes over the time that we've allotted to be here. I want to turn it back over to my mentor, Dr. Cheryl Williams-Jackson. I would like for you to, if you would please, close us out with, and before you close us out, if you could do a brief explanation on why you teach these breathing techniques in all of your classes and to all of your students nationwide. By the way, she travels nationwide teaching. I don't want to say what you teach. I'll let you do that. I don't want to give any explanation incorrectly, but Dr. Jackson, if you could just tell the people that are viewing this why you teach these breathing techniques, where you teach these breathing techniques, and who they're for, I'd appreciate it. And I'm putting the spotlight on you now.
Here we are in 2020, and we're having the same conversations that our parents had, that our grandparents had, our great-grandparents, parents had. And so we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we want to see some movement? When do we want to get off that hamster wheel that we're on right now? Because it's like every now and then, you know how that hamster wheel goes back a little bit and then goes forward again. And that's what happens to us over and over again. I still have hope, especially because of this generation and what's happening with them, but also we have, those generations that are still here who are able to pass the history on as far as social justice. What has it looked like over time? So for me, what I wanted to do is to really understand from the mental health aspect, what are we missing? So one is we're having this dialogue here. And if you notice, we did not get into debates.
Yes.
We even talked about not comparing someone's, pain being more than another person's pain, because their pain, that's all to it. It's a fact. And so hearing everyone's story. So dialogue becomes an important thing to take place. However, we have not learned how to have those dialogues. And I'm hoping that what we did today was allow people to hear you know, the different perspectives and how we were able to sit back and hear everyone's perspective on it. Now, some people will say, but you didn't have someone there who was totally the opposite. Well, that's another platform, because we already know what that will turn into. That the possibility is that that will turn into a debate. So that's another platform where the intention is to bring in the voices that are more varied at that point. But you have to start somewhere. And so what you got today was females who come from very different backgrounds, very different racial experiences in this world, different experiences as females. And so that's where we start. So we're not going to get all of the differences in this one room and this one space of time, but this is our start right here.
Yes.
So the next thing that I do is I help people to relax in these conversations. When I talk about it, I become very passionate and I'm unapologetic about my passion. So when I sit up straight, when my voice changes or goes up, and if it makes someone else feel uncomfortable, what I have to do is ask them to figure out for themselves why that made them feel uncomfortable.
Right.
Because I definitely didn't say anything to attack you today. But if it made you feel uncomfortable, anything that we have shared, that's actually something for you to work on. And that's part of the healing. Is for if you heard something being said that you have never really investigated, never really researched, never really talked to anyone about what it means, then that's the work that you have to do. Because I keep getting people asking me, you know, how do I get started on this work? Well, we're sharing with you right now how you get started. So anything that has pushed you beyond your comfort zone, that's where you start, right there. So the other thing I do is I try to teach breathing. And the reason why I do, the reason why I do that.
You froze up for a quick second.
Oh, did I? Oh, okay.
Yes.
The reason why I teach breathing is because I think that we have to take care of ourselves in this work, no matter where you enter into it. Whether you're just entering at racism 101 and you're just trying to find out, or you just been sleeping on it, you've been listening as a bystander saying that that's not part of my life, so no matter. But now you've been projected out of that lounge chair that you were in. Yeah. So whatever it is that you are going through, I think that sometimes as you're hearing new things or things that you've talked about over and over again, you have to be able to find and understand yourself and bring yourself to some center to be able to find clarity, to ask those questions, to have the dialogue. So what I do is I have people to do whatever you need to do to get comfortable and to just kind of sit with your back kind of up. Ooh, if you take and you sit up right now, did you notice anything different just happened to your body? Did you feel anything different?
I was breathing.
You breathe, and that's exactly what happens, is that you end up breathing because you've changed something in your system just now. And we're not going to go into all all of that about it, but it changes something for you. That's important. So if you hear something in the room that you are uncomfortable with, change the shape of how you're sitting or how you're standing of your body to see if you can get some more breathing going on so that you can calm your system down so you can continue to hear and listen to learn what's happening in the space. Okay. So then what we do is that we're going to breathe through our nose for 4 seconds, or whatever you need to not stress your body out. Because the idea here is to relax your body, not stress it. And so you're breathing in for at least 4, somewhere around 4. You're holding in somewhere around 6, whatever your body says is comfortable with. And then you're breathing out slowly for 7 through your mouth. But however, that mouth is like this. So if someone's standing 6 feet away from you, they can hear you breathe out. So in other words, don't do this right now with the pandemic going on in an environment. So now what I want you to do is find a space, find something in your mind that helps to relax you. And I'm just going to share with you what relaxes me is the ocean. And so when I breathe in, I see an ocean wave coming into the shore. And I'm holding it in because it's sitting on the shore. And then it's slowly rolling back out. And now if we can do that again. And if we can do it one more time. And whenever you feel you're ready to come back, and just know that as I heard you breathing out, there was something about us co-regulating ourselves that really helped me out also, because I can hear you. And so there's something about, just like you do, you yawn and the next person yawns,
Yeah.
it becomes contagious. So in a room when we're having these kinds of discussions, sometimes you just deep breathing can help someone else to take that breath that is needed. So I hope that helps.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys all for doing this for me and with me, and opening up your hearts and your minds and your souls to talk about this. And please, I hope that this continues. I know that it will, but I really hope that you can take this dialogue and start this with your friends and family as well. And thank you so much for joining me, all of you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.